Alex Smith, I'll see you again at noon Eastern, but right now, stay right where you are. It's time for AM Joy with my good friend, Joy Reid.
If the president wants to come up to me and tell me to my face that it was a terrible tragedy and how it should never have happened, and maintain telling us how nothing is going to be done about it, I'm going to happily ask him how much money he received from the National Rifle Association.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. While the survivors of the deadly school shooting in Parkland, Florida are taking Donald Trump and the NRA to task for their inaction, the president, true to form, is making the horrific deaths of 17 students and teachers all about him and his sad, desperate need to deflect from the Russia investigation. After the FBI admitted that it failed to follow up on a detailed tip about the shooters 6 weeks before the shooting, Trump used the admission to continue his crusade against the FBI, tweeting, "Very sad that the FBI missed all of the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They're spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. There is no collusion. Get back to the basics and make us all proud!" Exclamation point. So here's the thing. The FBI is a federal agency employing approximately 35,000 people. Many of them investigate major crimes, murders, cyber crimes, and the like. And yes, they are supposed to follow up on tips about potential violent crimes like the massacre in Parkland. Indeed, someone at the FBI failed to follow up on just such a tip called into the public hotline in January about the Parkland shooter. But it's an entirely separate part of the FBI that investigates counterintelligence. Things like, say, an American presidential campaign colluding with the Russians. Mr. President, the massacre of those kids was not about you. But Robert Mueller and the FBI's investigation of your campaign, that's very much about you. And you can't end that investigation by trading on the deaths of children. Joining me now in Washington is Washington Post opinion writer Jennifer Rubin, The Root political editor Jason Johnson, former State Department senior advisor Nayyera, MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance, and former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence Frank Figliuzzi. And Frank, I'm going to go to you first for your reaction to the President of the United States blaming the FBI, in essence, for the massacre at Parkland.
So, Joy, let's distill down what that late-night tweet really says, right? So in some cheeseburger-induced coma after 11 p.m. last night, the president decides to put this squarely on the FBI. So here's what he's telling the parents of America. Hey, our gun violence problem would go away if the FBI would just leave me alone. That's what he's saying. He's saying the FBI is spending too much time on the Russian threat, and while he is spending zero time addressing the gun violence threat. He's choosing to ignore what the FBI actually does for a living. He's choosing to ignore the fact that the local police visited this guy 39 times in response to 911 calls. Social services for the county had to do an assessment of this. Everyone in the school saw the warning signs and indicators, yet he decides not to address the mental health issues, not to propose solutions on making it easier to Baker Act somebody because they're insane, making it easier to deny an assault weapon purchase because you have mental health issues. Instead, he's defending himself from the FBI. Why? He's read the 32-page indictment that Mueller issued on Friday. He knows there's electronic intercepts of Russian officials. He's scared out of his mind, and he's playing with the parents of America this morning.
And I want to stay with you just a minute, Frank, because you're right. And indeed, on that point about mental health, he actually signed an executive order reversing the President Obama executive order, which would have made it more difficult and put roadblocks in the way of somebody with mental health issues from getting their hands on an AR-15. Am I correct in the way that I stated the compartmentalization of the FBI? Are the same people who are investigating potential campaign collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, is that the same division of the FBI that would be investigating potential major crimes, like the shooter in Parkland?
No, you're right on the money. Congress literally dictates the amount of manpower resources that are put on national security, counterintelligence, violent crime. It's all dictated by Congress. So what President Trump is implying, let's go with him, right? Let's call this out. He's saying, well, maybe if they would shift some of those resources, let's say even Congress were to shift resources away from Russia threat and into violent crime. Let's play this out. Here's how this works. Tip comes into FBI switchboard. Someone's a problem in Broward County. Do you know how that works? The FBI field office gets a hold in Miami, this case would be Miami, gets a hold of Broward County sheriffs, says, hey, We got a tip on this guy, Nicholas Cruz. You got anything? Broward County Sheriff says we've been there 39 times. We've written up reports saying people say he's going to shoot people. We can't Baker Act him. We've got an issue. We're up against a wall. The FBI might decide to go knock on his door. And you know what? Nicholas Cruz has had that happen 39 times. He's trained on how to talk to law enforcement and calm them down and say, I'm really not going to do it tomorrow. I really don't have specific targets. And now you can't Baker Act him. So if you play this out, nothing different would have happened here.
Yeah, not only can't Baker Act him, can't touch his guns. Can't touch them even if he poses with them on Facebook, says I'm going to use them to shoot up my school. There's nothing you could do about the guns that he has, and he can buy more of them. He could get an Uber, go to his school, and shoot up the school. And Donald Trump doesn't want to do anything about that. Let me go to you, Jason Johnson, because it is ironic that the party and that the ideology that has spewed so much hate about Black Lives Matter, specifically claiming that they hate law enforcement, that this is the way they talk about law enforcement, because it isn't just Donald Trump blaming the FBI and federal law enforcement here. Here's Jeanine Pirro, who I believe was a prosecutor. She worked in law enforcement and worked with law enforcement. Here she is last night on Fox talking about law enforcement.
And although shooter Cruz pulled the trigger, the potential slaughter, twice reported to the FBI, could have been prevented had they bothered to lift a finger. This FBI was stained and politicized by Mr. Holier-than-thou Jim Comey. But the seeds were sowed by former FBI Director Bob Mueller, the one now investigating President Trump.
Well, how the heck did she not get elected to the United States Senate? But wait, there's more. Here's Tucker Carlson, who I believe is a Blue Lives Matter guy when it comes to local law enforcement, when, you know, and when he's talking about Black Lives Matter. Here's Tucker Carlson on Fox last night talking about the FBI.
But at least we know what our federal agents had been doing recently, why they were too busy to stop school shootings. They've been chasing down bad Facebook trolls. Today, the FBI admitted it was given explicit warning that Nicholas Cruz could be planning a massacre, but they never even followed up on that. If only someone had told them Cruz was talking to Vladimir Putin, they would have been on it, presumably.
Jason, your thoughts on the apparent wholesale collapse of right-wing support for federal law enforcement?
Well, it's interesting. You know, they like cops when cops are doing what they want them to do, and then, you know, which is bashing black people in the head. But then they don't like cops whenever it comes to actually investigating what's going on in the world. And part of this, honestly, Joy, not only is it extremely ignorant, and it's, again, an attack on our federal offices. I mean, they act like the FBI is the X-Files. It's Mulder and Scully, and they're really busy, and they couldn't get to this. You've got lots of different people who work on these kinds of issues. Things get lost. Things get overlooked. At the end of the day, Cruz was still going to be able to buy his gun. And then lastly, and I think this is this, and the blame, all of this, it comes from President Trump. This is what he does. He makes everything about him. He makes everyone else to blame. Remember, he told LaDavid Johnson's wife, well, he knew what he was signing up for. The first tweet that he did about Parkland was, oh, your parents should have known better. They should have warned more people. Nothing is about Trump's responsibility, but everything is about him. And that's what we're seeing with this case, where he's going to attack the FBI, the local kids, the local cops, and the local teachers. As long as it's about him and he's got no blame, that's what Trump does.
Yeah, and Jennifer Rubin, not only that, but Donald Trump's concern. You know, he's worried that the FBI is spending too much time investigating him to actually care for children. Well, what did he spend at that hospital? Mostly giving thumbs ups and smiling into the camera and saying things were great and amazing and using the superlatives like he was selling, you know, used cars. Then he went and had a disco party. He went to Mar-a-Lago and he did a little disco party. There he is. Party, party, party. And somebody, a very wise person on Twitter tweeted, 17 kids were murdered. This is our president that night. So it's not as if he was, I guess he's too busy too, right?
You know, he couldn't have spent less time at that hospital if he had been on roller skates going through the halls. He is entirely incapable of showing empathy. He does not understand other people's feelings. He doesn't understand people's suffering. He is utterly failed at the consoler-in-chief role, which both President Obama and President Bush and President Reagan, you can keep on going back, really, every president in the modern era has been able to do. But he does not, because there is something terribly wrong, terribly off about him. I would add one thing to what your guests have been saying, and that is that he is hiding behind the dead body of 17 people, the dead bodies. think about that for a moment. How low, how despicable, how cowardly that he's making their deaths, their family suffering, an excuse for his own malfeasance. It's just lower than low, and we keep saying that, but somehow this is kind of the worst of the worst, I think, that we've seen from him.
And Nayyera, you worked at the State Department. What message does it send to our allies and friends around the world, indeed to dictators around the world, when the President of the United States would, in the words of Jennifer Rubin, as she said, hide behind the bodies of dead children to disparage federal law enforcement in the executive branch, which he controls, to basically disparage his own federal law enforcement team in order to protect himself?
There has been a longstanding principle of national security and diplomacy. When you go overseas or you speak to the rest of the world, you always put America first. Unfortunately, with Donald Trump, he puts his ego first ahead of national security. That is a strong signal to dictators around the world and to our allies. Our allies are under attack from the Russians as well. Just in France, the most recent election, you had Russian bots trying to interfere with media, trying to interfere with public opinion and voting. But the French people saw it for what it was, because the leadership came together to protect their security of their election. Our president, instead, would rather follow what the Russian bots do than listen to his own national security advisor, to his own intelligence agencies. He would rather follow the orders of Vladimir Putin to not impose sanctions on Russia. Then he would rather help the American people in their time of need. He is going to continue to sow confusion when the indictment is very clear. There is a Russian connection. There is Russian interference in our elections. And that will continue into 2018. And our president, in the meantime, is going to be throwing spaghetti at the walls to see what sticks, so nobody will point the finger at him.
And Malcolm, on that same vein, what kind of message does this blaming the FBI send to our counterintelligence professionals, to the intelligence community that is doing its job trying to protect this country against Russian interference in our most sacred political process, our democratic process, small d? What message does it send to them when the President of the United States blames federal law enforcement for the massacre of 17 kids and teachers?
Well, it's very simple. They cannot trust the United States. It's just that simple. All of this starts at the top. It starts with the leadership of the United States. We know that the rank-and-file officers in the FBI, CIA, NSA, that they will do their job. But, you know, there's going to be those meetings which you have overseas where you want to share information with the United States. And with a wink and a nod, they'll pretty much let our peers will let us know that we're not going to get the full story unless it's something which directly affects the security of the United States or their national security. You know, interestingly, I'm writing a new book about Trump and Russian intelligence, and it's the KGB had a 4-point strategy that they would use when propagandizing about the CIA. And their first point was attack, demoralize the leadership of these agencies. And the second point was allow the American criticism to destroy the rank-and-file personnel. Donald Trump is literally carrying out Russian intelligence policy.
And, you know, I want to do one more for you, Frank, because this was an agency that you worked for, that this was part of your career, and I'm sure these are your friends that Donald Trump is talking about. These are the people, your colleagues. Not only is he doing it, but everything Trump does filters down to all of the right. The media must speak like him. His agencies must speak like him. Everyone must speak like the dear leader. They all have to repeat his turns of phrase and the way he behaves. Jefferson Sessions, who is the Attorney General of the United States, has now joined in this chorus of bashing the FBI, which he supervises. Here is Attorney General Jefferson Sessions on the missed FBI tip. It is now clear that the warning signs were there and tips to the FBI were missed. We see the tragic consequence of those failures. The FBI, in conjunction with our state and local law enforcers, must act flawlessly to prevent all attacks. This is an imperative. We must do better. Okay, that's fine. But where is the defense of the hard work of the men of the FBI from this same Attorney General? And do you think that that would have been, that criticism that he made is fair on its own without adding that defense of his own people?
The Attorney General knows better. He knows the law. And he should be countering the president with the facts, and the American people shouldn't buy into this. Look, here's the law. There is no existing federal statute that would allow an FBI Miami agent to knock on Nicholas Cruz's door, and put him in handcuffs because he's fixing to get ready to hurt somebody. I've never put handcuffs on somebody who was fixing to get ready to shoot somebody. There's no federal statute. If you want to step up and do something, then pass new federal law that allows law enforcement officers, police officers who've been to your house 39 times to put handcuffs on you. How about changing the instant background system for gun shop owners that says if your name is in FBI files associated with violence, you can't buy an assault weapon? Right. These are the solutions. And what's happening inside the FBI right now is instead of viewing the president as an advocate, they've actually started viewing him as part of the intelligence threat to the United States.
Amazing.
Ouch.
Amazing times. It's hard to believe that we are here, but here we are. Frank Figliuzzi, thank you very much. Jennifer, Nayyera, and Malcolm will stick around. Jason will be back with us in our next hour. And up next,